If you want to learn how to make Ghibli style textures in Substance Painter, the latest course from the 3D coloring book was made for you. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to consider getting the course. Now let's get into this week's video.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Melfi. I'm a recent uni graduate and have been doing 3D art for about a year. I'm currently building my portfolio on ArtStation to hopefully get a job in the games industry. This video will be less of a tutorial and more of the processes I took and thoughts I had throughout the creation of this weapon. I used Maya for the modelling and animation, Substance Painter, Photoshop and 3D Coat for the texturing. I hope you enjoyed the video and are able to take something away from it. So, the very beginning of this project, I found a concept that I really liked and decided to use it as reference for the sword. To get the 2D image to Maya is really simple. So what I do is I made a plane and then went into the attribute editor, Lambert 1, clicked on this little checkered box here, which then opened this. And since I saved the concept, I click on File. So now what I do is I click on this folder to open to find the concept that I saved. Open that, and you can see it's worked because you can see the little sample image there. So now I need to, so this sample image basically acts as a texture that goes onto the plane. So I need to do that, which applies the texture to the plane. And this plane's flat at the moment. So for the majority of this of the making of this sword, I actually use a different what are they called? So for the majority of this project, we actually use a different viewport. To get to your different viewports, you press space on your keyboard, which then you can see the orthographic view here, which you can move around. You see the top view, the front view, and the side view. So we're actually going to be using the front view for most of this. And as you can see, you can't really see much. Well, you can't see anything on this at the moment because the plane is flat. So if you just move the plane, if you just tilt the plane like that, you'll be able to see it now. And again, as we did on the orthographic view, apply the texture, and there we are. I found this concept on ArtStation by a concept artist and illustrator called Alexandre Coadou. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. So once I had my reference image in Maya, there were multiple ways I could go about modelling the weapon. One being a really cool tool that Maya has it's called Quad Draw. It's just down here, and what you have to do first is you have to make the object live. So if you just click on this magnet up here, that makes this plane live. So I can't click on it now. Go on Quad Draw. If I look to the front view, it will make it easier. So what this allows me to do is place vertices down flat onto the plane itself, and then when I hold shift and click, I can place the faces down onto the plane. Now this is a really easy way to create these more complex shapes. Obviously this isn't very complex, but when it comes to the tentacles, it's a lot easier to use Quad Draw. So when I drag this shape out that I've just made, obviously it's flat. So what we need to do is extrude, bring it out a little bit, and there we go. Change the material. There. So that's a really easy way to make the more complex shapes, and that's what I actually used for the tentacles. But we'll get to that a bit later. So what I actually used to create the blade is just a simple shape. Just get a cube, change the material. So if I drag that up, go to the front view again, I'll just drag that to the top, make sure the corners are aligned. But also I want to add more subdivisions. So I'll just bump them up to 3. I'll leave the bottom one as 1 because that's just the side. And now just what I need to do is drag these vertices down, make sure they're somewhat straight across the blade. What I do now is I select the bottom faces, go back to front view, and just extrude them out by holding shift. And just make sure they fill the blade to get the basic shape. And just keep doing that all the way down. Now when it gets to this bit, I'm going to select the individual vertices and just create the shape of the bottom of the blade, like that. Now we'll go back to the top. I'll just delete these edges, and if I hold down Control and press delete, it also deletes the vertexes. So if I go back and do that again, but without holding Control, it'll leave the vertexes there. So if you hold down Control, press delete, it'll get rid of all of it. So what I need to do now is just drag these down. I'll do that for this one as well. Hold down Control. And actually a really good idea when you're doing this is to go to the attribute editor. If you go to where the texture is, transparency, you can actually make it transparent. So what I do is I have it about there, so I can actually see the concept behind it. That makes it a lot easier, especially now I can see the blade. So I can just drag these down like that. And there we are. I'm just going to add a few more subdivisions just to get more of the shape of the blade. One there, one there. There we go. So now we've got to this stage, I'm just going to put the transparency up again, go to the orthographic view, and there we've got the very basic shape of the blade so far. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Edit, delete all by type, and delete the history, because that will get rid of all these things that were up here, and it just it's easier to to find the texture if I need it quickly. Also, I'm going to freeze the transformations. This isn't completely necessary now, but this especially if the axis gets a little bit messed up like that, it just puts it back to normal. I'm also going to center the pivot. That just makes it easier for me to move it around if I need to, or make it bigger or smaller. So now we've got the basic shape. I'm just going to add in a few more details, like the little cracks in the blade here. So how I'm going to do this is I'm just going to do the transparency again. So that's all lined up. So now I know where I need to do them. So I'm going to add 3 here with the multi-cut tool. If I go to the orthographic view again, I can see them there. Do the same on the other side. Or actually, I can click on this, do it straight across. So if you hold Control and Shift, it allows you to do a straight line across the object, like this. So now we've got those. If I go back to my front view, I can simply just drag these down. I'm gonna move that down a little bit and out like that. Move this up Run these down. So most of just making the blade is making sure the vertices aren't overlapping, making sure everything looks clean. I'm going to get rid of this one for now. We'll add it back in a minute. So now we've got that. And we just do the same thing for the smaller one. Doesn't have to be right on where it is on the concept, because you can move it afterwards. So if I just drag these down like this, if I create a line down the center of the object, or the side of the object even, like that, that means I only need to do details on one side, because then later on I can just mirror it on the other side, and that makes it a lot easier when it comes to the texturing process, because you can overlap the textures. So then basically what you do on one side translates to the other side as well, and that's really handy, especially when it comes to weapons and blades that are symmetrical on both sides. So once I have the line down the middle, I can just delete the back face like this. Might be easier to do it in the side view actually. If I do this, delete that. Now what I can do is I can go to Mesh, Mirror. I want the Z axis, and it just mirrors it like that. You can change the offset. I think I want it about that. And also the direction, but we won't change that now. So once that's done, I'm just going to put the transparency up again, just so I can see it better. Now if we just connect these vertices like this, there we are, we've got the other one. I'll just move this one back like that. There, we're almost done. We've almost got the blade. So now once that's done, I'm just going to clean up the lines a little bit. I'm going to get rid of this one and the one on the other side as well. If I delete those, straighten this line out a little bit, and the same one on the other side. If I go to the front view, it'll make it easier, I can select them both then. Do that. If I connect this one to that one, do the same on the other side. Now our lines look a little bit cleaner. I'm just going to move this one a little bit over here. Pull it down. There we go. Now we've kind of got the basic shape. So if I select the edge where the actual blade is going to be, like this, just go down and select it all, like that. Get these ones. And if I just pull them together to make the edge of the blade like that, there we go. So having done that, it's kind of made a slight crease in the object, as you can see down there. See that line? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this, which selects it on the other side as well because they're connected. Bevel. And that'll make it smoother. So that'll smooth it out like that. So now I think the blade's pretty much done. A few little tweaks here and there, maybe make it a little bit thinner, but for the most part that bit's done. So the next thing I'm going to do with this sword is make the handle, and the handle is basically just a cylinder shape. So it's fairly simple really. Just drag that on. So obviously the top bit is a little bit bigger, and then it just gets smaller as it goes down really. So if I just select all these faces, drag it down and gradually make it smaller. Don't know, move it over a little bit. Drag that all the way down. Might make these a little bit bigger. There we go. So that's about it really. That's about it with the handle. So once you've got the basic shape of the handle, you just need to basically position it, which is what I've done. Just in the middle, at the bottom of the blade. It doesn't matter too much about, you can see a little bit of the top here because the tentacles for the most part are going to be covering this whole bottom bit of the blade. So, just as long as the middle section and the bottom section are visible and they look good, then that's all you need. So now in terms of the bottom section, I'm going to do it in separate parts. So to start with, I'm just going to do the top bit, which is just a cylinder. Now if I multi-cut down the middle like that, select these two edges, bring them in, and the vertex is at the top and the bottom. And that's all that is really. And now for the tentacles at the bottom, these little things here, I'm gonna do them as cubes. So if I start with a cube here, and now like the blade, I'm just going to drag these vertices down, select the bottom face, and just drag these down. So I'm just aiming to get the basic shape of the tentacles at the minute. Like that. It doesn't have to be perfect. There we go, that's one. Now for the other one. So once I had the two tentacles on the handle bit, I kind of had to find a way to round the edges, because obviously if you look at the text, if you look at the concept, the edges, you can tell that the edges are more rounded. I had a little bit of an issue on this part because the easiest way to do this would be to bevel it, but as you can see, you can't really get a good bevel on this section of the object, and if I were to do that, you can see that the UV shells basically invert, they go inside each other, so that obviously wasn't going to work. So instead I kind of had to do it manually. So what I did was I selected essentially the top kind of sections of the object, go into front view and just pull these out a little bit, make it so it looks decent. And then the easiest way from here was just to select the vertices and bring them down to make sure it all looked alright. I'm actually going to do this one as well. Just bring that up a little bit. Right, so now we've got that section done. I'm just going to bring these bits in like that. And now as you can see it's getting there, it's more rounded. So now I'm just going to do the same thing to the other side. Select the top half of it. Front view. Bring these out a little bit. I'm just going to bring this down a little bit as well, like that. And then just bring these in. And that's just kind of the easy way of doing it. Yeah, so I had a little bit of trouble on this before. But because of the texture, because we're going to hand paint the texture is going to be basically most of the detail on this whole sword. So just kind of getting the basic shapes down is what we need at the moment. So I'm just going to do the same thing for the other tentacle here. So now we've got the two tentacles done at the bottom. I'm just going to combine them to make it easier, so it's just one object now. I'm going to go to edit. I'm going to delete the history. And I'm going to do the freeze transformations as well. I'm actually going to merge, I'm going to combine it all, I think. So now on looking back at the concept, there's these two rings, and that's fairly simple. You can just use this object, and bringing the subdivisions down obviously changes the shape of the object a little bit. We're not going to go super basic, but we don't want too many subdivisions because obviously looking at our poly count, it can't be too high. Yeah, so we've got about 600 faces on there at the moment. Using this object, you can also choose the radius, so you can make it wider or thicker. We want it fairly wide, and then when changing, it doesn't change the radius when you resize the object, which is nice. So if we just get them in place, we'll resize them in a minute. There you go. Go into front view just to get them in place, like that. And we'll do the same for the other side as well. There's not really much point in making it, you can just duplicate it and put it here. Just going to make them a little bit thinner, like that. There we go. So fairly simple there, to be honest. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to merge these. History. There we go. And I'm also going to center the pivot. And that's the handle done. So at the moment we've got the blade and the handle. So when it comes to making the tentacles, there is obviously the quad draw method that I mentioned earlier that you can use, or the polygon cube. And I'm actually going to use the polygon cube because I find it's just easier. It's the method that I use the most, and when it comes to the polygons themselves, I feel like it looks a lot cleaner than using the quad draw method. So I'm going to go ahead and make the tentacles now. If there's anything that I feel like needs saying, then I will. Otherwise, yeah, I'll just make them. So now that the tentacles are finished, I'm just going to go to edit, delete the history, and also freeze the transformations. So I've merged them all together and obviously mirrored it from one side to the other. So now these shells should be exactly the same, and I can stack them when it comes to UVing. That's something that I have to kind of keep in mind when creating, especially weapons, because obviously the symmetry, they're going to be the same. Whatever's on one side is going to be the same on the other side. So yeah, what I do is I often just make one half of the sword and then mirror it for the other side so I can stack the shells. That obviously saves a lot of UV space on the map, and makes it just generally a lot more simpler and easier when it comes to texturing. So the way I did this is, it's probably not the quickest way, but it's the way that I felt most comfortable with doing. And once you kind of get into a rhythm of things, it speeds up quite a bit. And yeah, I'm happy with the result so far. So the way I basically did this was by using the polygon cube, and basically just manipulating the shape into the general shape that I wanted, and adding edge loops where needed to kind of get the shape of it. It also helped a lot to isolate the various objects that I was using. So if you hold down Control and press 1, whatever object you have selected, it'll isolate it. So you can do that with anything, and that just makes it a lot easier to focus in on one object that I was working on. One of these tentacles, I can just I can just isolate it and work on that one individually, and then you just press it again to bring everything back how it was. That's just a little skill and a little trick that you can use in Maya. It's super helpful, super easy to use, and yeah, just something to keep in mind when you're making something with various objects. So now we've got the blade, the handle, and the tentacles. The next thing I'll be doing is the eye, and that's really simple to do. So for the next part, I'm going to be creating the eye. So all it is really, it's just a polygon sphere, which you can find there. Change the material. So I'm just going to be dragging that into place and resizing it, just to fit it into this little area that I made with the tentacles. Like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Control and press D. That'll duplicate it. I'm going to drag that into place on the other side. Make sure it looks roughly the same. The reason I didn't mirror this is because if I did, then it would become one object. So if I do that now, actually, and just show you guys. So if I just mirror that and offset it, make it look the same. Now if I isolate that, it's going to be one object. So if I tried to separate that, obviously you can see this error down here that it's not going to work because it's just one object, and you can't, if you create one object, you can't separate that. It has to be two separate ones. So yeah, that's the reason why I didn't mirror it, and instead I did a whole new one, and I duplicated it. So yeah, that's the eye is done now. Just drag that there. I'm also going to keep them as separate objects because when it comes to animating, I'm going to be animating them separately. They're going to be doing different animations. When I created the original one, I did merge them and try and kind of select them by using the edge face tool and doing it that way, but that didn't quite work. That was an issue that I had, so I had to go back, separate them, and basically redo the animations for each eye, which was obviously it's not ideal. So now, learning from that mistake, I can start by separating them and doing them individually. So now I've got the two eyeballs on the model itself. what I need to do is animate them now. So if I go up here and go to the animation tab, so usually we're on modeling, and that will give us all these options up here. Click on this drop down menu, go to animation, and now we've got it changes. So what I need to do is I need to open the graph editor, which is on Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. And I'll open this window here. And down here you can change the FPS. So it's by default it's on 24. I usually keep it as 24, and then when I press play and have a look at the animation, I go to 60, just because it makes it look a little bit normal and not really quick. But obviously doing the whole thing on 60 would increase the number quite a lot. So if I put that on, if I put this on 800, you'll see this number go down when I go to 24. So now it's on 320. So it just makes it a little bit easier to animate in general when you've got the lower FPS. So I usually just keep it as 24 until I want to see the animation. So to start with the keyframe animation, what I need to do is I need to go to animation, key, and set the key. So this is basically the first step of the animation that we're going to do. So if we key this in, this will put the little dots on the animation screen. So if I go to, I usually try and do whole numbers with this. So if we drag this over to 50, go to the front view, it might make it easier. If we just change the position of the eye, so we have it looking up to the left to start with, set a key there. And what I like doing is basically just keeping that frame there for about the same time. So if we go to 100 and set the same one, and then we just do this until we get about to 500. So now to the top right, set the key there, go to 200, do the same thing, 250, bottom right, set the key, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back to where it was before, or roughly thereabouts, so about there, that'll do. Set the key, and then I'm going to go all the way to 450. Actually, I'll go to 500 and set it there. So now when we go through the animation, if I put this up to 60 just to see it, there we are, and now you can see the animation there as well. So what you can do is each one of these colors, basically the colors represent a different part of the animation. So if I was to drag these down, you'll be able to see it move here as well, or not. But one thing you have to do to make sure first is this line has to be where the animation is. So if I was to do it over here, obviously you can't see a difference there, but if I drag that on, you can now, like that. So yeah, basically if you want to make small changes, just drag it onto where this bit represents the the animation section, and you can just change it like a tiny bit, and obviously because we want the end result wants to be the same as the start, we want it to basically loop round. Make sure these lines are straight, so whatever is, take a look at these and make sure the lines start and end at the same part. And that's basically it for the animation. It's really simple, really easy to do, just keyframing on Maya. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. It would be nice if I could just copy and paste it, but I tried that last time and it didn't quite work. So I'll have to do that manually, but again, it doesn't take too long. You know, it's quite simple, so I'll just do that quickly now. So now that both are done, I'm going to just isolate this, the object, the sword. If I press go to 60, press play, you won't be able to see much, but if I select, you can see the wireframe moving like that, and this side as well. There we go. So that's basically how you do the animations. Again, really simple once you know how to do it. Yeah, it doesn't take too long. What I'm going to do now again is I'm going to isolate the object. I'm going to edit, delete the history, and freeze the transformations. Yeah, that's. So now this is ready for UVing. It's important to remember some of the aspects of stylized art, one being exaggeration and another being vibrant colours. You'll notice these features in pretty much every piece of stylized art you look at, and in terms of this sword, the main exaggerations are the tentacles and the blade. Obviously this version has no colour at the moment, but when it came to the texturing phase for this one, I had to keep in mind the colours from the concept and ensure that the colours were identical to match the energy of the concept, and to keep the interest of the viewer with both the vibrancy of the colours and the interesting shapes and forms of this weapon. With the animation of the eye, I took a lot of inspiration from World of Warcraft, more specifically the Battle of Azeroth expansion, as it included a lot of corrupted areas with giant animated eyeballs and creatures with tentacle hands, so it was easy to just draw from my memory of that stuff. I also wanted the eyeball to look as if there were souls trapped inside, looking for a way out. So when it comes down to unwrapping this object, the easiest way that I did it was, so I paired each of the tentacles either side of the blade together, because this way it allows me to isolate the individual tentacles like that, which then obviously that's much easier now to unwrap the individual the individual objects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do each of the objects. So all I need to do now is, because I've got this line down the center of the object, I can just cut straight down the center like that on each of these. That's all I really need to do for these tentacles. Just cut straight down the middle and that should work perfectly. So just for each of these tentacles, isolate them. Also, before doing this, when I open my UV map, it basically automatically unwraps it. So what I did after that was I just went around all these individual objects, the blade and the tentacles and everything, and I held down Control and I just removed the lines that are already on these. So obviously there's a couple that I missed now, so I'm just going to do those quickly. So as you can see, there's these white lines here that I missed earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Control, double click, and just remove them, and just make sure every single one of these white lines have been removed. So what I can do now is I can just cut down the center of these. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to basically pick the edge that you might not see. So for this one, it's probably going to be this one. So it's the underside on the inside of this object. That's the one you're least likely to see. So you're not going to see the, the cut in the texture when it comes to texturing. I think I only need, I only really need one cut in this object, because then once it's on the texture, it'll obviously be 2D, so it'll be, kind of flat. So I'm going to keep it like that for now. So now they've all been unwrapped. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open the UV editor, make that smaller. Usually I would have this, so the editor and the toolkit on a different monitor, my second monitor, but for the sake of this video I'm going to keep it where it is now so you guys can see it as well. Just make it a little bit smaller, like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to combine all the tentacles. And now from here I'm going to go into the editor like this. So once I've highlighted all the tentacles on my sword in my object, I'm going to go to modify, unfold. That'll unfold everything, and obviously it looks like a giant mess at the moment. I'm going to orient the shells, layout, and there we go. So we've got all the shells on the map as we need them. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to modify and stack similar shells. So for some reason when I came to unwrap the blade, it wouldn't quite stack how I wanted it to. Obviously you can see it kind of overlaps on the blade bit on the side there. So what I did was I went into the top view, I deleted half the blade like that, went to mirror, and now when we go back to the UV map, as you can see, it's already stacked, so it's stacked automatically, and that's quite a good way, and it's obviously a very quick way of just doing the blade. So that's how I did that. So now each of the parts of this sword have been unwrapped. What I'm going to do is I'm going to combine the three parts like that, because ultimately what I want them all to be on one map. So now that I have the sword and the eyes unwrapped, the last part of the modelling process of this sword is the smoke that will be coming from the eye, and this is probably the easiest part of the modelling, because all it is really is it's just a plane that acts as an alpha card. And what an alpha card is, it basically acts as a canvas where I draw the smoke, and then when it comes to rendering and applying the various maps to the model, I can use it as an opacity map, which will essentially make parts of the plane that I haven't drawn on transparent. so you'll only be able to see the smoke and not the plane. So if I just get that into place, like that, I can just copy and paste it to the other side, flip it around. That'll do. And I obviously don't need to unwrap these because they are already unwrapped because they're just flat. So what I do now is, because I'm drawing onto the plane itself, I'll be doing that in Photoshop. So what I do is I highlight the plane or the UV, click on this little camera button here, and that'll save the map. So then once you click that, you save it to wherever you want on your computer. Preferably, I generally use a PNG. And then you just open that up in Photoshop like this. So what I did was I just added a plain black background behind it just so I can see the UV map more clearly. And that allowed me to easily draw on top of the or behind the UV map. So then when I apply this to the model, you'll be able to see the smoke and not all the black bits around it. Although I think generally when you apply this to the model, you'll be removing the whatever background you have just so it's transparent like that. And the way I made this smoke was I basically just drew in some random squiggles, and then I kind of manipulated it by using the go into edit and just these transform tools. They're quite easy to use. You can, perspective and skew and all that kind of stuff. I also used the eraser to get rid of some of the bits I didn't want, and make these lines more harsher. And I also blurred these bits out and used the eraser, lower the opacity, and just went over like that, just to make it kind of a little bit more faded. And yeah, that's how I made this, really. Very easy. And that's why alpha cards are so popular, because you can use them for a lot of things as well, such as effects, leaves, grass, all that kind of stuff. It allows you to, get that level of detail in video games you expect, but not kind of cutting into your poly count budget too much, especially if you are on a budget in games. You're not cutting into that budget too much. But you're still maintaining that good level of quality that you would expect. So yeah, that's how I did the smoke, just a flat plane. Saved the UV map, opened that into Photoshop, created a layer behind the UV map, and did my smoke effect on that. And just so I could see that easier, I just placed a plain black. Just use the fill tool to put a black background behind it. And then when it comes to saving it as a PNG, to apply to the model, remove everything or hide everything except the one you've drawn on, except the layer you've drawn on. And then when you apply that to the model, you'll just see what you've drawn and not anything else. When it comes to the texturing, I'm not going to redo it all like I did with the model, because that would take a while. So I'm just gonna kind of show you the processes that I went through, and hopefully give you some information and some tricks that you can use in the future, and also maybe learn a bit about the software that I use. So for the start of the texturing, I used Substance Painter, and obviously you can see here this is the viewport where I can move around the model, and this is my UV map. It's similar to Photoshop, where you have the layers down here. You can kind of alter the UI how you want, but I generally just keep it like this, nice and simple. And yeah, so the first thing I do when I get into Substance Painter is the model will look like this at the start. What I do is I go to Texture Set Settings, which should be next to your layers by default, I think. Go to Bake Mesh Maps. If you click that, this window will come up. I generally stick to 2048. That just seems, I get a decent result from that, and yeah, it doesn't increase the file size and stuff like too much. So I generally just keep it like that. I apply diffusion. And I also kind of keep the sliders where they are. For now, you can change them all how you want. Obviously, there's a lot of customization you can do with this, but I just generally keep it how it is. When it comes to the high definition meshes, that generally means the high poly. So this is where you basically add the high poly model. But since I don't have a high poly model for this one, because I didn't actually use ZBrush or anything like that, this is all done in Maya, I just applied the low poly. So I just basically applied this mesh on top of it, if that makes sense. And how I did that is I just clicked this button, which opened up my files. I just opened the file and that put it into this menu. When I click Bake Select Textures, I'm not going to do it now because I've already done it. When I click that, it'll bake all the maps on, and it should look something like this that I've got here. So now that that's done, what I did was I then just started applying the textures to the model. So I opened a folder, right click the folder, add black mask, and now I can just select any of these textures that I want. I'll just pick a random one. Just pick this one here. When I click the black mask, it gives me these options here. So I go to the polygon fill tool, which is right here. Then I go to the UV chunk fill, and then when I click on the mesh itself, I can apply these textures to it like that. And that's just, it's just super easy. It just applies instantly. You can also use this one here, the polygon fill tool, and select the individual polygons. And that's a really cool way of doing things. Maybe they're attached to to a different mesh, and you just want a certain a specific part of that mesh to be that color or whatever. But it's a really cool feature in Substance Painter, and yeah, it just makes it super easy to texture your models. So that's all I did to get these. If I delete this one, I also went in and changed the colors of them. You can go in and change the settings and the roughness and the metallic. Obviously this is for the tentacles, and they're metal, so I wanted them to increase the metallic like that. And yeah, it just allows me to customize the materials themselves and apply all the textures, the base material textures that I can kind of go from there when I start painting. You might notice on the map that there's these details like on the blade and on the handle that obviously they don't look very nice, but you can't really see them on the blade because they're behind the tentacles. This is generally a kind of issue when you bake. So the way to kind of fix this is to just play around with the dilation width and the distance of the baking and stuff like that. But because this is going to be hand painted anyway, I'm going to be painting over these details, so that's the way I'm going to get rid of them. So I don't need to play around with the baking, because I can do that manually. So using Substance Painter is the first step of the texturing for this sword, and the next step will be importing the sword into 3D Coat for painting. Even though at the moment the model doesn't look very good, Substance Painter is actually a really important part of this texturing process, as it gives me all the different maps I need, such as the normal, roughness, and metallic, and etc. The way I can view these different maps is if I click on this drop down menu here where it says material, I can see all the different maps that are associated with the model. Some of them I don't really have, or they don't, they're not like super important. But some of them, like the roughness or the base color, the metallic, these are always really important, and something that I will be including in the final render of this weapon. But it's just really useful to see them at the start of the texturing process, so I can kind of fix any issues that there are, or there might be, before I start painting over the top. It's always nice to have a roughness layer, whatever you're making, because it kind of adds these little markings, the imperfections, and these are a really nice addition to especially weapons, as if you're making a weapon, or you're looking at a weapon, you're always going to see the little imperfections, as if to kind of give off the idea that it's been used. You can, however, change this, or alter how much roughness you have, or even remove it altogether by going into the folders of the materials and finding out which one it is, and changing the sliders depending on how much you want. But for me, I'm going to keep it as it is because I like how it looks with roughness included. So this is the curvature map of this sword, and generally curvature is important on stylized art, and it's something you'll see across the majority of stylized art in general. But it's not super important for this sword, as I'll be painting over it anyway. But it's especially useful kind of in the early stages of the texturing, because it allows me to easily see where the edges are on the mesh, as you can see on the material map. So this is what the end result of the texture looks like after using 3D Coat. To get the basic kind of texture for the blade, what I did was I imported the concept into Photoshop, and then I just cut around the blade and just resized it and put it into position behind the UV map. This made it a lot easier when putting the blade into, or the sword into 3D Coat, because I was able to just paint over the top of the texture material instead of doing it all from scratch. After importing the model and the textures into 3D Coat, it was my first time using 3D Coat, so I wasn't very familiar with the UI and just generally navigating around the software. So I ended up kind of going into Windows and changing some of the keybinds and moving things around to make it as similar to Photoshop as possible, because I'm very familiar with Photoshop. And that made it much easier to just generally navigate around and paint on the model itself. So when it came to doing the detail on this pattern here, with it kind of going in, it's got like an indent going down the blade. I actually ended up doing that in Photoshop, so I imported the normal map into Photoshop, and I basically just got a dark purple, and I drew down the blade in Photoshop and then put that onto the model when rendering. And after after finishing this sword, I realised that I could have done it actually in 3D Coat with the use of this depth. So if I just draw over, you can see that it's going in slightly. And you can also do this going out as well, like that. And this would have saved me, you know, a little bit of time, and it would have made it certainly a lot more easier, as in Photoshop I had to kind of line it up with the UV map and the texture, and it was just a lot of kind of like fiddling around, where I could have just drawn directly onto the map like that. One really useful thing that 3D Coat has is you can actually import the concept or any reference that you want to use into 3D Coat. So when it comes to painting, you can hover over and you can just select the various colors of the concept. And again, I didn't actually know this was a feature until after I finished this sword. So I chose all these colors. Well, I chose most of these colors, you know, manually, and again, that would have saved me a lot of time if I had known this. So yeah, that's a really cool feature in 3D Coat. So when actually painting onto this sword, I had to keep in mind what materials were kind of connected to each of these parts. So these tentacles would have had a kind of metallic material to it. So and this handle would have kind of been glowing and shining. So obviously this, you know, this, especially the top part of this handle, would have been kind of emitting some light, which I evidence around here, just kind of painting onto the material, adding some kind of green bits to the tentacles, and again up here, because the bottom of the sword is going to be glowing as well, so I did it on the top bits. And this is really good because it just kind of emphasizes what the materials are, you know, on the specific parts of the blade and the sword in general, and it's just easier to read that way. So other than that, it was my first time using 3D Coat. I really enjoyed it. I'd definitely go back to it, you know, for any future projects that I'm doing, and yeah, I would definitely recommend picking it up if you can. But again, I'm still very new to this, so I'm enjoying kind of learning the new features and learning what it has to offer. So when painting the eyes, I did it all in Photoshop. So I skipped Substance Painter, and I didn't even bother with 3D Coat when doing the eyes. I just did it all in Photoshop. Sometimes this is easier. I found it much easier because I'm familiar with Photoshop. So it didn't take very long. And since there's two eyes, but they're on different UV maps, what I did was I just duplicated it and pasted it over the top of the other UV map to ensure that the eyes are identical on either side. Going back to 3D Coat then, when it comes to doing the roughness and the metallic maps, you can actually do that in 3D Coat as well with these sliders. But I didn't actually use these. I put these down to 0 because I already had the maps from Substance Painter, so I didn't need to use these at all. And instead, I just basically painted onto the base color. For the rendering of this weapon, and most of my projects in general, I like to use Sketchfab as it allows quite a lot of customization, like adding backgrounds, including lighting in the scene, and various ground shadows or environments you might want to add, as well as the maps themselves and all the sliders that allow you to alter the maps to how you want them. Any post-processing filters, and any customizations I want to do to the animation, like the cycle mode or the speed of the animation. I also use this thing called Sketchfab Labs Experiment, which allows me to remove things like the background, any effects that I might have, and also parts of the model itself. This allows me to get really clean, high resolution screenshots. I appreciate you guys watching my breakdown of this weapon, and even though I couldn't exactly show you everything, I hope you learned something from this video, and I wish you the best of luck with your projects. If you're interested in seeing any of my other work, or just simply to get in touch with me, you can find me at these places.